Jim.
Morning, Andrew. Good to talk. Here we are once again. Can you believe another week has rolled by?
I can't believe it. I'm in
Hopefully a week
disbelief.
filled with much bagpiping for all of us. And drumming, of course. Let us not forget the
Bagpiping.
drummers.
Bagpiping, drumming, and hey, by the way, don't forget to check out Dojo Insider just before we get started, everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Daily dose.
No, how do you find it? pipersdojo.com/insider. But that's a daily bagpipe lesson curated by your friends at Dojo University, where it's basically 14 cents a lesson for those who want to keep their bagpipe education going, even though maybe they don't have a ton of time or a ton of budget space for piping right now. That's the place. That's how we keep the flame alive, Jim.
Keep the flame alive. Is that Cormac McCarthy? We're carrying the flame.
Yeah, something like that. Is he the guy that wrote the zombie book there?
He wrote The Road. There weren't necessarily zombies in there, but it was an end of the world thing. Yeah. And
thing.
He also did No Country for Old Men, which has a lot of death. Not zombies, but lots of death.
So I read The Road a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was fine, but it's so dark, right? And then I remember
have the road
starting
dreams all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember starting some other Cormac McCarthy books. And then I have trouble with it. I have trouble with Netflix now too. Like if a show is too dark, I just I give it the time out and I'm like, nope.
That's interesting. I was talking about that with my good friend Jeremy the other day, or maybe it was a one-sided conversation because maybe he mentioned it and maybe I responded in my head. But he mentioned, I brought up a show and he mentioned something like, that looks fun, but there's enough darkness in my world right now already. I might watch it later. And I just thought, yeah, that happens to me too.
I feel like you just get sucked in. I remember, is it the Bends, the Radiohead's album before OK Computer? I think it's called The Bends.
Those blend together for me.
That was the first time in my life I recognized this problem, right? So it's beautiful music, right? But what I found is I got the Bends loaded on my iPod at the time, I'm sure.
Nice.
I don't think it was an iPhone or anything. Got it loaded on the old iPod, and I used to walk back and forth to class at SFU. I lived in like the dorms, which is like a 10-15 minute walk to get into class. And so I had the Bends on the iPod for a while and kind of getting into it, loving it, fake plastic trees, And over a short period of time, what I didn't realize was related, but I just started to find myself in this weird dark place where everything seemed really depressing and like overly meaningful all the time. And finally, several days later, I realized like, wait, it's this damn music. It's making me feel all dark. And
it's like you're starting every day.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is not going to work. Sure enough, I love the music, but I had to turn it off. So I turned it off and then I instantly felt better, like this weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But maybe it's just because I'm just very impressionable with my absorption of artistic things.
Yeah, you've got your antenna up and you're receiving in a strong way.
I think you have to be careful to recognize when what you are absorbing yourself in, you have to be able to recognize when it's not optimistic.
I can dig it. It's maybe analogous to like diet, like if you're eating a lot of junk food, you got to realize that's making your body feel sick. Now it sounds like I'm saying Radiohead is junk food. That's not what I'm saying. I like Radiohead, but
no disrespect to it at all. It's certainly, I think OK Computer's got to be in the top 10 greatest albums ever made. It's got to be.
Yeah.
If we're being honest.
How many great musicians too have come since then that probably wouldn't exist if it weren't for Radiohead as well? Great group of musicians.
Yes.
But what if, here's the segue, a daily dose of Piper's Dojo is going to have you feeling excited about bagpipes, motivated, happy. That's good stuff.
And we are an optimistic group, right? In the sense that we believe in playing the bagpipes for all the right reasons and avoiding bagpipe status disease and keeping it fresh. So anyway, we ended up on a long tangent there, Jim, but it's that kind of day. Light and fluffy day today. So what do we got on the docket, Jim? What do we have?
We've talked before about how I've bought like large batches of reeds myself. And I know that I usually personally like to be going for kind of that medium space, medium, maybe medium hard. I like to get a variety usually, like some easy-ish, some hard-ish, but mostly right there in the middle. In all honesty, I don't really know what it means when people say that their reads are so many inches, right?
Okay.
I I have you can see it. I have a manometer right here,
Yes. So do I.
and I have a feeling that's related, but I've never looked into it carefully enough. And so like I hear people say like I feel like is 20, 23 inches like kind of a normal read because I feel like I see that come up a lot. But
Yeah.
what does that even mean? I don't know what the difference between 21 and 23 is. Is that like a
Okay.
super easy read to a medium and then 40 inches is hard or what's going on there?
Okay, good. So first of all, I'd like to issue a disclaimer before we proceed. To people who actually know what they're talking about, please get the barf buckets at the ready because I am now going to try to explain inches of water. So inches of water is like what is it? It's a measurement of pressure or something, or it's a measure of whatever. But anyway, the way I've seen it and I think about it is if you actually take the manometer and if I were to blow into one end, which I'm not going to bother doing, but if I was going to blow into one end, one side of the water goes down relative to the equilibrium and the other side goes up, right? Because you're pushing the water through. So as you push the water in, that water's going down, but then subsequently on the other side, that water goes up.
Mhm.
Making sense? So now instead of the two sides of the manometer tube being like this, now it goes like this.
Yeah.
My understanding of the situation is the distance between this and this is a certain number of inches,
Mm.
right? And when we measure inches of water, that's what we're measuring is sort of the differential between the high and the low when you push water through a tube. And then that could be a good measurement. That's a measurement of how much pressure is being input on the one end.
And that's the pressure. I'm guessing this is hooked up to a chanter or a drone or something, and the reed maker is blowing through. And when they're getting good sound, they're marking that's how many inches it took to get the good sound. So this is
Mhm.
a that many inches difficulty read.
Yes, exactly. And they probably do it with a gauge, right? So I
Mm.
think originally you were measuring it in a tube, not too different from the manometers that we see here. But nowadays you can measure that with a gauge. I've seen little mouthpiece things you could put
Mhm.
over a chanter to measure the inches of water, and then it gives you the readout on the little gauge.
Oh, have they
So
just put a new sticker into a gauge, and so it's going to a number of inches rather than a PSI reading or something like that?
yeah, potentially. Yeah, potentially. There
Or I
must
guess
be
they
inches of water on the
they
gauge. Yeah.
maybe they have a conversion table or something where it's like,
Could
"Oh,
be.
this many PSI at this many inches."
Yes.
Gotcha, well, that makes sense. So if I would just orient myself to or familiarize myself with what how many inches means, then I'd know, "Oh, that many inches, that's a medium-ish read, that's a hard read. Oh, wow, you're blowing that many inches? You're tough."
So for me, it's not the most scientific thing, but for me, I always get the feeling like inches of water is not enough. So
Mm,
when we play a reed, I feel like you can get a reed with a certain number of inches of water, but that's sort of it's an extremely fallible measurement system, right? Because I feel like there's another dimension to playing a reed. I'm sure we've all felt it. And again, this is just me feeling things. I don't know that if there's any real science behind this, but I feel like some reads, even though they're harder, operate with a lot more efficiency
hmm,
than other reads. So it's really about for me, it's like really about the output to input ratio almost of a read. And it's not so much about exactly how much pressure it takes to make it go. And then do you really have to put the reed in the bagpipe to actually get a feel for what the pressure is going to be? And are the reed makers actually doing that when they measure that or not? I honestly don't know. It'd be
hmm,
interesting to talk to a reed maker about that. But I think the PSI or the inches of water of the reed, I think it could be a useful starting point. But still, we're going to have to put the reeds in the pipes and we're going to have to play them a little bit, get used to them, figure out where the quote unquote sweet spot is of the reed
hmm.
and work on that and establish it. And we might find that some reads that have a certain qualitative, or is it quantitative? I don't remember, but have a certain exact PSI. There's still going to be a lot of variance between them in terms of whether or not you can sustain them and whether or not you can blow them and whether or not it's the right strength for you, right?
So these inches of water measurements, like you say, are maybe a useful starting point. It's like a way of categorizing what you're going to purchase or get from your pipe major at band practice, but it's not that one reed that's listed as taking 22 inches and another reed that's listed as taking 22 inches are going to be like identical.
Yeah,
I might plug those in my pipes and find that they're very different in
for
other
sure.
ways.
For
Mm.
sure. Absolutely. And you do see that sometimes. You're like, well, I got you sent me these reeds, they're all 22 inches of water, but what the heck? They're not all the same. What's going on with that? And that's because there's other qualities of a reed. It's not just how much force it takes to get the reed to go. There's other things. How
Mm.
vibrant is it? Does it balance? And of course, cane is an organic material. It's very organic. Sorry. Ugh, long weekend.
It
Cane
is
is an
organic.
organic material, so it inevitably is going to be variant. It's not always going to be the same. Reed
Mm.
making is a tricky kind of game. And then who knows what happened to the reed during transit? Maybe it dried out.
Yeah.
Maybe it didn't. Maybe it froze when it was up in the air. Who knows? I don't really know how these things work. But there's a lot of potential reasons why those reeds are going to have variance, and that's just part of the game that we have to play in order to
Mm.
find the reeds that we like.
Mm. That
Everybody's
makes
different,
sense.
right? And who knows? Maybe you got a batch of reeds, right? You put one in right at the peak of your piping fitness.
Mm.
Okay, so it feels nice and easy and comfortable, and then you come back to that batch of reeds in a few months during the off season. You're not in shape anymore. Your lips aren't in shape anymore. Your diaphragm isn't. You don't have the rock hard abs that you had during peak season because
Which we all always get
Oh,
during.
I definitely do. That's why I don't right now. It's not peak season.
Yeah.
So just stick around, everybody. You just what was I talking about? Yeah. So you return
Abs.
to that reed, and so it might seem like that reed is really hard now, even though it's the same number of inches of water. It's just your frame of reference has changed. Could be a big thing
Yeah,
too.
that's a great point. Yeah, yet another filter after all of these others that could have effect causing variation on the read. There's also the me filter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. I've learned this the hard way over the years. I remember
Mm.
one time in the Oren Moore days, early Oren Moore days, there was a player who was having trouble getting a steady sound, and I tried the person's read, and it was a really easy read. And I thought to myself, this person should be able to blow a harder read than this. And then I put them on a training regimen to play a harder read. And of course, at the end of the day, there's some merits to playing the harder read. But at the end of the day, I probably just needed to understand that everybody's going to be different. And my definition of what's hard and easy could be completely different than someone else's. And by the way, it tends to be. So the inches of water system is cool because it takes the reed maker's biases out of the equation slightly, which can be handy. I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but I've received a lot of batches over the years of easy reads that were too hard for me.
Yeah.
And that could just be because the reed maker works with reeds
Right.
all day. So they build up like this incredible strength. And to them, easy is hard for me
You
just because
imagine
they're
like
just working with hard reeds all day.
yeah.
Strong.
Yeah, Chris
So,
Apps or Adrian Melvin or one of these makers just sitting there just honking on reeds all day. They just get real
Mhm.
strong. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's, and you just don't know, right? Or maybe Adrian Melvin has like just incredible rock hard abs.
I think you must.
And maybe that's what it is. I wouldn't put it by him. He's a tough looking dude. He's got the friendly exterior, super nice guy, but he's got the abs.
That's right. Yeah,
But you just
yeah.
never know, right?
Now, speaking of the manometer, the inches that it takes, etc., and the gauge as well. You had a blog post a while ago on Piper's Dojo website. It was presenting the case for the tube style manometer,
Oh yes.
and where you were laying out what can these three options do for me? Can the tube style? Can the gauge style? Can the electronic app style? And I'm thinking when you're talking about the app style thing, it's like those ones that like show frequencies, right? Like the strobe frequencies and stuff. So if you're
Sure.
playing it, can it identify when I'm steady?
Yes.
I'll be honest with you, Andrew. This tube style manometer that I have here is still mostly aspirational because the few times I've plugged into it, I've just kind of had to go, no, thank you. I don't
Yeah.
have the emotional fortitude or the time to address how much this is hopping up and down, especially on my top hand. So part of me feels like maybe what I want is a gauge style or electronic app style if it'll be a little more gentle to me, but that's not really what I want. I want to get better. So then when I'm looking at the tube style manometer, versus the gauge style pressure reader versus an app? Am I obviously I'm not looking at this for tuning, right? The gauge style manometer is not going to help me tune. This is about steadiness of pressure.
Hmm.
Is that a good way to put it?
And if you think steadiness of pressure doesn't play into tuning, you'd be mistaken, right? So
Mm,
steadiness of pressure is a prerequisite of being able to tune your pipes. So it's very closely related. But yes, what we're talking about is achieving steady blowing, okay? But also steady blowing at the optimal pressure that your bagpipe should be played at, right? We've talked about that in past
yeah.
episodes where we can't just blow steady. We also have to hit a certain pressure target in order to get the optimal sound out of our pipes. And the nickname for that is the sweet spot of the Chanter reed, right? So we need to blow steadily at the sweet spot of the reed.
So that's something that any of these three potentially could do for me. Because with the tube style
Yeah.
manometer, I can mark the spot for the Windex or water to get up to and try to stay there. With
Hmm.
the gauge style one, I can just pick whatever number it needs to be pointing at and try to keep the needle there.
Hmm.
And with the app, whatever the interface is going to be, I can find holding the strobe steady or whatever it is and get there. So those three can potentially do that for me.
Hmm.
But can I mark what that sweet spot is if it changes?
By the way, Jim, there's a fourth option there
Mm,
that people often forget.
what's
But
that?
I learned to blow steady with none of those things. And I just had to use my ears
Your
and
ears,
my
huh?
intuition. And I had to use the variety of different feedback I got from instructors and judges and stuff like that. Over the years, I had to just kind of whittle all that information down and sort of deduce how I was going to get the steady blowing, which, by the way, asterisks on all of this, I still don't blow perfectly steadily. I don't know anybody that blows perfectly steadily. So it's still a work in progress, of course. But yeah, I had to learn how to do it without anything and just
Mm,
using my ears, which can be done as well.
mm.
I think most of the great pipers you're looking at did it that fourth way.
Pro-
So what we're talking about here is just tools that can help us in the
mhm.
process.
Yeah, and probably an important thing, whichever of these tools we were using, would be to be listening as we're also watching, because maybe we can then train our ears in a way
Mm.
while we're using this. So if any of these can find a steady spot, what if my sweet spot changes because I changed notes on my chanter, or because I changed reeds, or it's just a new day, and so my sweet spot is just a little bit different than it was yesterday? What benefit is there to using a tube style manometer over the others, if there is one, from day to day, if my sweet spot
Yeah.
shifts a little bit from one spot to another?
Yeah. So we definitely feel at the dojo, right? We definitely feel like the tube style manometer is of all of those three tools, significantly superior. And we do have a little blog article about it somewhere. But yeah, I would not advocate the use of this tube. It's awkward and it's annoying and it takes up space in your practice room and whatever. I would not advocate that unless there was a good reason. Now, maybe the reason is because the dojo operates a tube manometer manufacturing empire and we've cornered the market and we're making billions of dollars
Yeah.
by keeping the gauge and the tuners out of the manometer discussion. And we are infecting the minds of people for our commercial benefit. That's
Mm,
always possible. So I encourage the listener, you don't take my word for it and make sure you really investigate if you think that there's some sort of, economical super conspiracy going on here. You can tell that it's probably not that. I don't think the tens of manometers that people purchase from us each year are really factoring into this. Back down to earth. We just feel like it's the best tool. There's a couple of key things that the tube style manometer does for you that are really important. The most basic thing I would say is it's just extremely visual. So as a visual tool, it's far superior to any digital tuning like technique with the digital tuner that I've seen. And it's also superior to the gauge. The gauge is cool. I especially love the gauges that you can hook it's like they're built into a stock and so it can just
yeah.
mount. It can just mount on your blowpipe in front of you. That's cool. I wish that worked well, but in my experience, it's not quite as visual as I'd like it to be, in the sense that you can see the gauge go up and down, but we want to see the degree to which it goes up and down. And we want to see the consequence of trying different things. And we want to be able to spot exactly where in our blowing cycle things are going awry and so on and so forth. So with the water, and you were just pointing this out, Jim, the water is viciously truthful.
Yeah.
And when you royally screw something up, you have to feel the consequences of it, which brings me to my next point. The manometer is great at giving you a rolling average of
Mm.
what the pressure in your instrument is. And it does a good job illustrating the sort of average blowing pressure over time. And there's actually a little bit of a delay. There's a little bit of time that it takes to correct the pressure in your bag. And so it just tends to be a really useful tool in that way. Yeah.
I like that it's very intuitive in that when you blow harder, the level of water goes up, as simple as this
Yeah.
is, and when you're too low, it goes down. That's just a really tight one-to-one thing.
Mhm.
Whereas the strobe tuners that I have that the strobe I used a big strobe tuner when I was in high school for steady blowing, and the instructor would just put it in front of you, and you just stand there blowing an A for as long as you could. But it was a
Mhm.
spinning dial of multiple layers, and, like, you can start to get a feel for, oh, when it's spinning faster and slower, like, you get into that mode eventually, but I feel like the manometer up and down thing is just a lot more intuitively,
Yeah.
directly accessible.
Look, they're all just tools for achieving something that we're going to need to be able to do on our own intuitively over time. So none of these things are permanent solutions. And if I'm being honest, I teach less and less with the manometer over time. I used to do it a lot, and I do it less now. We do need to learn how to listen to it and think about it, and the manometer can be a good tool. The other thing that's difficult with the digital tuner and with the gauge, that's actually quite easy with the manometer, is to when you're recording yourself, right? So
Ah, yeah.
one of the best exercises you can do is just use the manometer as a recording tool. So what you'll do is you'll play, but you won't be looking at the manometer while you play.
That's the
Okay.
true test right there. Yeah.
Exactly. You won't be looking at it while you play, but then you can videotape yourself playing through your tunes. Or another great one is videotape yourself tuning your bagpipes.
Mm.
Okay. And then watch the video back, and then the manometer will be in the background of that video, and you'll be able to answer the question, am I actually blowing steadily when I play or when I tune my pipes? Because if I'm not, we got big problems, right? Am I actually blowing steadily or not? And what you'll find is you watch the video and you'll say, yikes, every time I hit a high A, the pressure then goes up way significantly on the manometer. Now, it's probably possible to rig up some sort of video thing with the gauge and other stuff like that, but just the visual element of the tube manometer,
Mm.
that's the reason we advocate for it. It's just, it's very useful as a visual tool.
I did
And
fill
just
mine with
remember, yeah.
Windex instead of water, so I can
Yeah,
see
and
it
then
better.
Windex, yeah. I use Windex as well because the blue water is easier to see, and also it doesn't get moldy on you over time because it's got
Bonus.
the chemicals in it, which is nothing is less attractive than a moldy manometer, Jim.
So you have a tally up score at the end of the blog article where basically the three-ish setbacks or detriments or knocks against the manometer system are not super portable. Can't operate all three drones when using it. And
Yep.
and then the last one was like, can it operate without Windex? So you're like, technically the gauge style can operate without Windex. So can the electronic style.
Yeah.
So
And they're way more portable, right? Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. But overall, in the blog post, the tube style did win against the others.
Yeah, and that's just what I think, right? And we've outlined some of the reasons about what I think. And Carl at the dojo, I think he agrees with me. But yeah, we actually had a person quit the dojo because we would not agree with them that the gauge style was better, or it might have even been the digital tuner style was better. And it's like, dude, if you think it's better, then you think just you do you. But no, it was like too offensive of an issue, apparently. But just keep in mind, right? For me, these are just tools that we can use to improve our skills. We don't want them to be crutches. I don't know why you would need to travel around. I don't know why you would need your manometer to be ultra portable. This is something I'm going to use in my practice room as I'm practicing here and there to test the quality of my blowing and to think about things. And maybe you would even use it on a daily basis at certain points during your development to dial things in. But
Hmm.
what do you need to travel with it for? And hopefully, maybe you're bringing it to band practice. And maybe every now and then, like bands are going to do some sort of manometer program, but it would it seems to me like it would be a mistake to spend too much time just sort of hooked into this device, staring at it, right?
Yep.
It would be way better to use it as a tool to help improve your intuition, right? And your thinking and your thought process. And then eventually, we need to be able to operate the bagpipe on our own, nice and steady. That's the end goal of all these tools we use, really, right?
Yeah, it makes sense that the ultimate in portability and not requiring Windex to operate, etc., is
Yeah.
the ears
Of
in the
course.
end.
And by the
Uh,
way, the metronome, the metronome seems like an extremely similar and parallel thing here as well,
mm,
in the sense that I love metronomes. I think they're great. I highly recommend people use them, but not all the time, right? We're going to use them. We're going to develop our sense of timing. We're going to use it as a tool. It's going to be there for us maybe when we're first learning about rhythm, right? To help us to develop that sense of timing. But yeah, the metronome is a tool to help us develop a great sense of timing. It's not something that you would use religiously all the time,
mm.
right? It's a tool. And then at some point, you need to be able to perform well without that tool and to present really great timing without that tool. Hey, everybody. Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo. And I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.